Welcome to our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Allow Us to Explain. My name is Jordan Broking, and I serve as the Director of Media here at ONC. In today's episode, as college and university kids go back into the classroom, we're going to be talking about the importance of college education and why some are choosing to go to college, and also kind of the economic little impacts behind it as well. But beforehand, let's introduce our panelists who are going to be talking in this nice lively discussion we got going on today. First, we are joined by Infrastructure Team Lead and our Director of Community, Tania R. Next, we are also joined by our Social Issues interns, Natia S. and Ronan C. And for our special guest, we are also joined by Professor Johann Neem. Professor, as our special guest, I'll let you introduce yourself first. Would you mind introducing yourself to everyone who's listening at home?
Sure. So first, thanks for having me here. It's really fun to be here. I'm a history professor at Western Washington University, which is in Bellingham, Washington, on the northwest corner. And I wrote a book, I have it here, called What's the Point of College? And so I've been thinking about this question with my students for quite a while, because I teach a 100-level introductory course called College in America, which is a sort of opportunity for students to think about why they came to college in the first place, why they came to Western, where I teach, but also more broadly, what do they want out of 4 years or so in college? It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. All right, Tania, I'll let you also go next to introduce yourself.
So as Jordan said, I am the infrastructure writer here at our national conversation. I am what you call typically a moderate writer. Obviously, I did attend higher education, and I really am looking forward to this conversation on the status of higher education and whether or not there's a crisis in higher ed right now.
Great, thank you. Natia, I'll let you go next.
Hi, I'm Natia. I'm a progressive writer here at ONC, as well as a substitute teacher, and I recently graduated from Fordham University with a bachelor's in international studies and a minor in Russian. So I love talking about higher education from a teacher perspective as well as from someone who had endured college and is excited to continue to talk about it. So glad to be here.
Lovely. And Ronan, let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ronan C. I was a former social issues intern, now in podcast, but I still do a lot of social work with podcast. I'm currently a senior, and I'm actually really excited to see where the importance of higher education is, because I've had 3, maybe 4 lawyers in my family, and me following in their footsteps. All they taught was like, hey, if you want to go to law school, it's not a joke. You really gotta go to school. So that was always kind of embedded into my head at a very young age.
Perfect. So let's actually just get that conversation started. This way, we have a few different viewpoints on it, just because, as you mentioned, a lot of times they have this ingrained into their heads from a young age. They have to go to college. Other times, people are looking to other routes of it. So, Professor, I'll start with you, actually, because I think your book is the perfect starting point for this. What's the point of college? So far, with your own students from this year or past years, what are you starting to see now lately when it comes to why some of your students are choosing to take on higher ed?
Yeah, so there's 2 questions there. What do I think is the point of college, and why are my students coming to college? And they're not always aligned, right? I think college is a place that's designed to be separate from the world. It's a place where we want students and faculty to really focus on acquiring the ability to use knowledge well, to think about their commitments to the public good. There's a civic component there. But really, it's an intellectual place. That's what distinguishes it from other kinds of institutions. It's what distinguishes it from other places that one might go after college as well. That said, people are coming into college for a myriad of reasons. And one of the ones that is a generational change is that increasingly people are told if you don't go to college, your life won't work. And so it's becoming kind of a default, right? That I better get to college and get a degree. And so one of the things that I like to have students do is pause and say, okay, you're going to get a degree no matter what you want. What you do here, what do you want the education to be like while you're here? Because there's still a lot of choices to be made about the kind of education you can get particularly at a college like mine, which is a comprehensive college. We do everything, from marketing to philosophy. So you have a lot of kinds of ways to think about your education.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of updates when it comes to, especially when it comes to how a lot of people are viewing it as really a benefit, as you mentioned, to not just bettering their own lives, but also preparing them for whatever workplace they're entering, especially in the infrastructure arena as well. Tania, on that point, I want you to talk a little bit more about kind of the benefits behind it, and also kind of this, I guess, partisan divide, if you will, when it comes to how some politicians say that, when a teacher professor brings their, outside of work or brings their political and social views into the room, that's when sometimes it might get a little clouded when it comes to the education. So why don't you talk a bit more about that, Tania?
So one of the purposes of higher education is to, as we know, gain knowledge, right? And if we don't know, higher education means study beyond the level of secondary education, which in the US we know as high school, right? And we typically look at as the colleges, universities, community colleges, vocational and technical schools. And in any of these, you're going to be gaining knowledge, no matter what degree program you take on, even to English literature to economics, you're going to learn something that is undeniable. But it's really gonna come down to how you apply the knowledge and adapt it to the changes in society, right? As technology advances, is your knowledge adapting to those current trends? I think that's something contemporary students need to take in consideration. But there is a perspective that while higher ed provides opportunity to gain knowledge, it's not the knowledge that is always preferred. And let me explain this. So it comes down to the question of, are college and universities too liberal, right? This is one perspective we see coming out from conservatives and Republicans, that the knowledge that is taught is simple liberal indoctrination. So the knowledge that we might look at as being fruitful, innovative, could also, on one hand, be looked at as too constricting, trying to fit every student into a box. And we see a research by the Pew Research Department where they say there's a growing partisan divide in higher ed, where roughly 8 in 10 Republicans say professors bring their political and social views into the classroom. And it's a major reason why higher education system is headed in the wrong direction. And only 70% of Democrats say the same. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there might be a crisis in higher education. So when we get the idea of, is higher ed providing opportunity to gain knowledge? It is, but it really is going to depend on your perspective, right? So we come down to the point of college, people want to gain knowledge, but then they come to this crossroads. Oh, the knowledge I get isn't aligning with my political ideology, right? Which puts them into some sort of crisis mode. So I think that's something we could talk about, right? Do we think this is true? Do we think college or universities are too liberal leaning? Or maybe are they just showing the truthful information, right? What do we think of that?
I'll actually toss that question over to Professor before I get over to Nadia and Ronan in a second. But Professor, I'll let you answer that first, just because obviously you're the one teaching the classes and everything. So how do you do this, especially at Western Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tania makes some good points, right? I've talked to many students who have come into my office and they've been moderate or they've been conservative, and they've said they've felt uncomfortable in a lot of classes because the professor is political and it's almost always liberal left views seem to predominate the interpretation and a presumption that that is truth. That said, we can also exaggerate that. We can also exaggerate the extent, colleges are very liberal places. I think that is a problem in certain ways. I think that it has certainly led to the partisan distrust that from a purely practical perspective is really dangerous because we need higher ed. And if one major political party in our country doesn't trust it, that's dangerous. And in a democracy, experts have to earn their trust from the people, right? If people want it, we can't impose our guidance on the people. People have to trust that when we speak, we have authority. And if our authority is seen as purely undermined by our partisanship, that's a real problem, whether it's in the classroom or in the public sphere. That said, it can also be taken and exaggerated, right? It can be seen as if, well, oh, that means that in every American history class, nobody ever teaches about George Washington anymore, or Shakespeare's never taught on campus anymore. And that's when it gets a little bit beyond the realities of campuses, which still are teaching a lot of these things. So I think there's a lot of truth to that, but I think we should also remember that colleges still have a lot of diversity and they still do teach a lot of the traditional subjects. And it's not like that's all gone from the curriculum or something like that. And sometimes the rhetoric seems to suggest.
Nadia, you said you also want to speak on the kind of teaching perspective as well at this. So I'll let you take the floor.
One of the things I think all education really strives to teach is critical thinking. And I think part of talking about either liberal leading perspectives or conservative leading perspectives is acknowledging that there's different ways to think and there's different ways to look at an issue. So I think instead of looking at, oh, my professor is teaching in a perspective that I disagree with, maybe considering changing your perspective on how you view it. Instead of seeing it as a problem, see it as a way to challenge the professor and to challenge yourself. Because part of what higher education is about is facilitating discourse. When I was a college student, one of the things that we did, especially since I did do a lot of international relations and politics, was being told some multiple perspectives and having a conversation about those perspectives and challenging what the professor thought was the right their right way, and also challenging what other students believe was the right way. So I think instead of it being a crisis of politics being involved with education, I think it's more of an opportunity for critical thinking coming into real life, and a real testament as to why learning about how to critical think is so important. So I think ultimately having political leanings involved with education can potentially be a good thing, especially in the realm of higher education, because it can be so transformative for an individual, which is a lot of what college is about, is changing you are as a person from going from a child in high school and stuff to an adult. It's a very transformative part of your life, and having that education and critical thinking aspect, I think, also facilitates that transformative nature of that time.
Ronan, do you have anything to add off of that?
I just want to say, first, I think everyone who spoke had some incredibly valid points, and I actually really hear. I pretty much agree with a lot of what everyone has to say, but I'm going to offer a slightly different perspective. I think one thing that I learned when it comes to people, when people seek higher education, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are going to use this said education, as spoken earlier, and use it probably properly and use it to get to the next level for someone's personal and financial gain. And when it comes to the workforce and the real world, there is a lot of people you're just going to have to say yes to. And you're going to have to put your personal biases aside. If you have very liberal professors, there's some stuff I'm left leaning on, and there's some stuff I'm not. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of a thing where situations like that, I've had extremely just liberal professors where I've had to argue and act extremely liberal when maybe I'm not. And maybe it's an opportunity to teach your brain that if you can get the right people to like you and you can get the right connections and maybe think a bit more socially intelligent and selfishly, then that's what I would use college for. because sometimes, even though yes, you could argue there is a crisis. I just think another even smarter approach would just be, hey, if you're really trying to get super successful and you're in a good college and you really disagree with your professors and not everyone financially can afford college, I'm very blessed to be in the position I have, and I take gratitude every day. I think a lot of people really take for advantage. I don't. My parents are the first to go to college, and some people's parents don't go to college. And I'm reminded of that. So if something that is not particularly in my favor 100% of the time when it comes to college, maybe it teaches me to think a different way, to be adaptable, and sometimes just kind of embrace a new form of suffering that I could use for a later part of application in life.
Absolutely. And Tania actually poses a good question, which I'll actually open up to the floor itself. When we're talking about critical thinking, that's what Nadia referred to as well, about how college is a place for critical thinking. Are we allowing for it to happen on a college campus if we are protecting students from views that they might find offensive? So what do we think about that? I'll open the floor to whoever wants to start first.
I'd say yes and no. I think it really depends on the university. Like, I go to Arizona State University, and Arizona is a very weird political state. You have people that are very left leaning and then people that are very right leaning. And there are times that we've had like Turning Point USA come in and just like other conservative organizations. And then I think they've been starting to get shut down, and they kind of claim that it's free speech. And like, I have nothing against conservative views. Like, I have a lot of conservative views myself. I just think I think there could just be better organizations that could like represent these conservative parties, or that's just kind of what I think. I don't know the politics behind some colleges. I think some of it could just be completely unfair, but other than that, that's kind of what I think sometimes.
So when the question we had at the beginning, like, what's the point of higher ed? What's the true purpose, right? It's to challenge your perspectives, to increase your knowledge. So I think when we have colleges say, oh, we won't say this because it might make people feel icky, I think that's very disruptive. I think that has made me disillusioned with higher education, because I want my perspectives to be challenged. I want to see a perspective that I have never came across before. And that's not saying that I'm allowing to hear a perspective that's full of bigotry. I want to hear a perspective that's valid, that it's cemented in facts and opinions that are based on data, right? I'm all here for that. But when I was in college, we had professors saying, oh, we're not going to talk about a Republican perspective because people might find that too triggering. I don't care for that. I need to hear that so I can understand it. Because again, I'm a moderate. I need to understand both perspectives to see if we can come with a solution, right? So when we turn away campus, like turning from campus, Turning Point USA, we're turning away different perspectives. We're now allowing our college students to become aware that there is a different pathway out there. There are different perspectives that are okay to have and that are okay to discuss. And that also opens the idea of safe spaces on campus. Do we think safe spaces on campus are disruptive to college life? Do we think that is cocooning students? But then again, I also understand the value of having those safe spaces, right? And my college campus, there was a Black student union camp center, right? Where only Black students can go on there. And we had a group of white students go there, and Black students started recording saying, this is not your space, you have to get out. Now, some felt very attacked by this, and particularly white students, right? So if we have those centers, are we disturbing college life? What do we think of those things? I know this is another question within a question, but I'm just generally curious on how we think the impact that has on higher education and how that might impact people like students wanting to go to higher education.
So I just want to jump in and just provide a little bit of context for this, right? So that not every professor, and there are prejudices and biases in politics in all disciplines, but it's the humanities and social sciences or fields like education where values and ethics and politics are deeply embedded in any kind of activity that we do, where the controversies become sometimes the greatest. And that doesn't mean every professor is sitting around saying, am I going to teach a class for lefties or righties or something like that, right? We are also experts. We're trained in disciplines. So there are these other boundaries that shape how we develop a syllabus, right? And so while I agreed with Tania earlier that, I think it is a problem when the professoriate is all leaning one way. And I think students don't always get access to the richness of potential ideas out there and experiences out there. I also don't want to give the impression that like professors are sitting around saying, some do, there are activist professors, but then some are trying to teach about, they're trying to teach Japanese history. They're trying to teach, maybe their political leanings are shaping some of that, but they're also experts who've like, these are things people need to know to be, thoughtful people who understand this period of the past. And so there's multiple things shaping the formation of a curriculum, not just one. And the other piece that relates to Ronan's on that is, whether or not Turning Point should be on campus or not, there's a lot of different criteria, including whether you're a public or private campus in terms of, who has access to the space and things like that. But ideally, a university is, the people that they bring on a campus, regardless of their politics, are experts. They are people who have earned their authority, not because they're loud, not because they're popular, not because they're liberal, not because they're conservative. Now, this is ideal. It doesn't always mean it's the truth. But it does mean that the kind of people, when we really should think about censorship, what we want to make sure is we're not censoring the proliferation of expert knowledge and the development of that knowledge on campus, right? I think that's a different thing than whether, you allow turning points on campus or not. It's not that but when you start saying we don't want historian A or physicist B on campus, you're entering a different sphere where you're like, okay, do we want the disciplines to be diverse and engage in the development of knowledge by really working together through complex problems? And that's really the heart of what I think a university is that kind of the cultivation of that expertise and the sharing of that expertise, but also the development in students of the capacity to engage with that high level intellectual life. Does Turning Points USA bring that level? You can decide. That doesn't mean I think you should censor them or not. It just means like that in some ways is a side issue to the core issue, if that makes sense.
To add on to that, yeah, I think if I agree with both what Tania and Johann were saying. It's if censorship is preventing this kind of the silencing of other perspectives, then yeah, that's probably something that's a censorship that shouldn't be happening, especially on a higher education campus, because higher education is really about facilitating conversation. But I think like protecting students from views that they might find offensive. I feel like from in my perspective, the line is if it gets hateful. If your views are being hateful towards a different person based on any aspect about them, then I think that's a pretty reasonable line to draw as to why that shouldn't be discussed or publicized or kind of allowed to foster on a college campus and college environment, because why safe spaces exist and why clubs for minorities exist and all of these other things is to foster inclusion and to foster a welcoming environment. So the second that hate speech is fostered instead, even if they believe it's not offensive or whatever, I think that's a reasonable line where we could say that a college campus shouldn't facilitate that kind of environment, if that makes sense.
If I could just add something is, like one of the things universities should teach us to do is to take a step back and talk about issues, right? And a lot of you have said that. I totally agree. So let's take something like immigration. I'm an immigrant. I was born in India. I was not born in the United States. That's part of my identity, right? If I go to a classroom and we're reading multiple perspectives on the benefits and costs, political, economic, cultural of immigration, if I treat that as an attack on my identity, that becomes a problem. Similarly, as a professor at a public university, I have clear rules that I am never to target any person based on national origin. So if I were to reach out and say, hey, so-and-so, that would be a violation of of the expectation of the classroom from my university. So we have to sort of think about this in a contextual way, right? Asking, does immigration have benefits and costs? How should we craft an immigration policy is a different question than targeting someone because they're an immigrant or not. But on the flip side, a student or a professor shouldn't feel targeted because someone's asking difficult questions that do affect some part of their identity as well as their understanding of themselves. That doesn't make it that you're being targeted. And sometimes we lose sight of those lines. And that's when some of these controversies over the crisis in higher ed, or are we censoring, gets out of hand, is when either side doesn't understand the difference between taking a step back, asking a set of questions, and targeting someone, you know.
And I think the main points that all of you have brought up in this part of the conversation is that college is a space for facilitating those conversations, whether they are difficult or not, and also trying to promote inclusion and be a safe space for some students as well. And another big reason why more people are starting to choose college, let's say over trade school, community college, etc., is to advance in society. And so there are some pros and cons to this right now. Obviously, for the pros of it, it can help provide opportunities to people in society, especially those who were historically disadvantaged. But it could also not guarantee jobs after earning a degree, or even, getting a job that has a good paying wage compared to their CEOs or employers. Nadia, let's just kind of start this conversation off first. When we're talking about social issues in this regard, what are we starting to see nowadays when it comes to students who are applying to colleges and those who are entering either four-year term, maybe their master's, two-year associate's degree? What are we starting to see with this?
I think there's a lot to be said in the sense. Like, we just recently had the issue with affirmative action. Our national conversation did a podcast about it. Encourage you to check it out. But we kind of talked about giving minorities more room and ability to apply to colleges and have that freedom and have that access. And that's still a point of discourse against the political spectrum. But I think also when it comes to college in general, is we're faced with pretty much anyone who applies to colleges and goes to college is faced with debt. They're going to go into debt to some degree unless they are really lucky and get full rides or a huge amount of scholarships, some kind of support or financial aid. But most people come out of college with debt, and that's something. And even paying for college in general, that's something. It's a very privileged thing a lot of people can't do with increasing economic issues and inflation and whatnot. It's hard for people to even make a living just on minimum wage. And so we have these struggles with families not being able to survive and have the money to afford to bring them to higher education. But I think pretty much you hear all the time nowadays is if you don't go to college, then you're not going to make a surviving wage. You're not going to be successful, which I think is a very isolated mindset, because there's different avenues in which you can pursue trade schools. You can make certain certificates online and do community college, and there's so many options here. But I think a lot of people have this mindset that if I don't go to college, or if I don't join the army, or if I don't do this, then I won't be successful. And then when a lot of people come out of college, they realize life's not easy with just getting a college education. It's hard to get a job. Coming from my experience, I'm over a year out of college right now, and I still don't have a job. I work as a substitute teacher, but I don't have a job in my field. I internship a lot, do a lot of internships, but otherwise, no. And that's a lot. I think, of course, it depends on the field, but there's a lot of people coming out of college with spending months to years not being able to find a decent paying job, and it prevents them from kind of doing what they wish to do with their careers and with their lives. And I think it's a genuine struggle that people who are in college and who are coming out of college are realizing, is that even if you get a college education, it doesn't seem to be enough, but you still have to do it anyways, to some degree. So I think the mindset and the attitude around pursuing college education is definitely a challenge within itself, keeping in mind the money aspect of it all, of can you afford college? Can you afford to deal with debt? And especially in the United States, you're looking at dealing with being in thousands and thousands of dollars of debt. I know, as someone with college debt myself, I'm going to be spending the next decades of my life paying for it. So it's a give and take, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I know quite a few people who have joked around saying that they're going to be paying off their student loans until they basically. So who knows how long that might be for certain people. Ronan, I want to bring you into this just because I know earlier you said that both your parents are lawyers. They went to law school, which is pretty crucial when it comes to that field, but there's also people who go to law school and then they don't end up being lawyers. So what's your perspective on this?
My parents did not grow up with a lot of money. My dad grew up in the south side of Chicago, like very bad area. And one thing they learned with college was a lot of time management. And I think I've really neglected it. This is going to lead into like where I'm going to go with this, but I think one thing that I always came to college was like, I think it's one thing with college, it's like it's such a great social networking opportunity, and it can teach you kind of how to build incredibly healthy habits, which I think people really just kind of maybe underutilized and like neglect. And as someone who is in an active member fraternity, I was always taught at as a pledge, there are 24 hours in a day, figure it out. And maybe even you could take time to focus on school, find a job, your physical and mental health. But where it comes to lead to this is even though like school is very expensive, um learning from parents that are lawyers, like it's kind of an instance of the ends justify the means. Like I think when it comes to college, like you really need to utilize maybe connections, or getting a very rigorous degree that's high paying, and you're in a lot of debt and it's real. And I commend anyone who's paying off their debt. I'm not saying it's easy by any means. My opinion is, okay, if I'm going to go with a lot of debt and I'm going to make that risk for myself, this is just me personally. People can take whatever ways. I want to be fine. I'm going to work to get a position that in 10 years I could balance my budget and be, to say the least, stable with a good job at a law school or something. Even if they don't go to law school, paralegal still pays pretty well. There are other legal positions that can pay really well. Even medical, like let's say you go to medical school, you get a degree and you don't finish. I know, even let's say you become a pharmacy tech. I know some pharmacy techs that make a lot of money, ultrasound techs. And I think a lot of that can be learned, even if you don't like one thing, through adaptability through college. Like I've switched degrees before, and then I kind of like relearned some new healthier habits and fix some new weaknesses and strengths. I kind of like to see with like find like if there is a will, there's a way. And keep in mind, I will be probably proven wrong and be shown some different perspectives by the rest of the panelists, but that's kind of how I've always was taught to approach college. Like, okay, this way isn't working. Like I think there's always a way. And if you have a slightly longer or shorter or just different path to be successful while using college, I advocate for it. I'm not here to, there shouldn't be judgment of that.
If there's a will, there's a way. And with that, Tania, I want to go over to you. I know you have a point on this as well when it comes to how, while college may be a good thing for some careers and some industries, it may not be the only option or the best option for it. So I'll let you kind of dive into that.
Yeah, when I approached that question, right, it really made me think of, I was thinking of Johann's book, right? But also like, what's the point of college if I'm leaving with massive debt? And even if I can pay that off in the future, it's still it's a big hefty bill I'm paying every month until I'm 60 years old, unless I'm a doctor who's making over $100,000 a year, right? But let's think of our English lit teachers degrees, or let's think of our political science degrees are probably not going to make that much, right? So I think it's a good dream to have the fact that you can pick yourself up by your bootstraps and just go hard and pay it off and you'll be all right. But that's not the reality for everyone, right? It's a very privileged perspective to have, but then again, I'm in the same boat. I'm very privileged enough to leave college debt free. My parents paid for me for my 4 years, so I'm very privileged in that sense. So I understand my perspective may not have any warrant to it, but I also understand that in California, for example, the average student leaves with over $37,000 in debt. That's growing every month with interest, and for some every week in interest. But going to the main question, college is good, but it's not for everyone, right? We can't make everyone fit into this college mold, because it won't always work. People drop out because they realize college isn't for them. Then they have this massive debt, right? They realize it isn't for them. And I think instead of just telling kids that college is the path to the American dream, to prosperity, to wealth, to all those things, we should also be opening the doors for them for the technical schools, for the vocational schools. There's a few examples I have for this, which is like the auto repair industry. Despite the growth of electric cars, auto repair industry is still going to be here for every type of car, and you can get certificates for this. You can get associates if you want to go the community college route. I think these things we can encourage our students to go to if they know and they've done the research themselves that they do not fit the college mold, right? I can also offer a different example, the semiconductor industry, right? To make our electronics work, they have these chips, and you can get certified in making these chips. That is a lifelong job you're going to have. You can even move international for that job, right? So there's so many different ways people can apply themselves and gain knowledge, right? And not have to work at a burger joint for the rest of their lives, right? And that's not to say working at a burger joint is bad. For some people, it fits them, and that's okay, right? But I think when we look at what's the point for college, we have to look at what degrees are actually going to benefit these students, right? Because there's some degrees, from my perspective, are going to leave graduates with a hard time finding a job. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to say that it's going to be hard, and you're going to have a lot of debt if you weren't privileged enough to have your parents pay for you, or not privileged enough to have a scholarship, right? So I think when it comes to colleges, if you are looking at the college route, look at jobs that are going with the times, right? It's what I was told when I was getting a degree in political science, right? They told me, if you're getting a degree in political science, you have to get a master's, or you're just going to be working as an office temp, because it's not enough, right? It opens up into this perspective, right? Of one, times are different now. Way back then, my parents' time, you didn't need a college degree, and you can get a good job, make good money. But look at times now where a college degree is needed everywhere you go, right? I remember I saw a little Twitter thread saying how a manager position at McDonald's was requiring associates in business, right? So it's showing there's this like sort of trend going on, but at the same time, I think that's wrong to have, right? I think we need to disillusion the blue collar industry and make people realize that there is an avenue for growth and financial freedom in that route as well. So I do think that we shouldn't just look at college as being the only way to grow yourself, right? We need to open the floor for vocational technical schools.
There's a lot of threads here. And I'm just going to pick up on some of them. First off, I want to push back a little bit on Tanya's point about political science and needing a master's. Like, the data doesn't hold that up. The political science majors can outperform business majors, can outperform biology majors. So I think if college is for intellectual advancement, you should choose a major with no relationship to what you want to do after college. That jobs, choosing what you study in relationship to professional training mistakes the purpose of college. College is about gaining knowledge and becoming an intellectual. And whether you do that by studying political science or physics or math or history or literature, you should be getting a good liberal education, and then you go off into the workforce, and there's all kinds of ways that those degrees can outperform all kinds of more narrower degrees. That said, I totally agree that we need alternatives. I agree for two reasons. I think it's insulting to people to say if you don't get this particular kind of degree that exists for this particular kind of thing, you're neither intelligent nor are we going to provide a labor or economic policy that gives you the opportunity to rise to the middle class. That just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not like being a historian requires more intelligence than being a carpenter or being an auto mechanic. We're trained about different things. We're pursuing different kinds of things. So I think we need to respect, but also encourage an economy that provides alternatives to college. So I share those of you. But I do want to push back on the debt thing, because I think I agree with everyone that college should be cheaper and more affordable, particularly public schools. And anybody who's qualified and wants to go should not have to have the burden of debt hanging over them. In fact, it's that burden of debt that kind of takes away students' freedom to study what they want to study. A student who wants to be like, I just really want to study math, or I really want to study political science, feels, and I would say sometimes wrongly, that they're going to be better off majoring in marketing. And that may not be true in fact, but that pressure is real and it shapes students' choices. So there's a loss of freedom as public schools raise the cost of attendance. But we do want to be careful. You know, the average student debt does not give you a sense of what students are experiencing. So the average student debt is around $30,000, and that's around the price of a new car, right? Now, the real problem is, and only about a third of that debt is actually held by bachelors. So a lot of the debt is held by people who have master's and graduate degrees and have very high incomes. The real problem are either people who don't graduate, or like they go to community college, but they never finish their AA, or they go to a bachelor's program, but they never get their degree, but they've inherited the debt, or they've gone to a for-profit that's effectively cheated them out of an education and taken a lot of their money. And when you're in that situation, you get debt that's not sustainable. And so we have to also realize that when we look at average statistics, we're not seeing the median debt. We're not seeing who can afford that debt. We're not seeing how that debt is hurting different populations very differently. You know, I empathize with the lawyer who, and I mean this very honestly, who feels they have to work at a private firm because they can't be work in the DA's office. I think that's wrong. On the other hand, I empathize less than the first generation person who tries to go to community college and life gets in the way and they can't graduate, but they have debt and that they can't pay back. So we also need to break that picture up into the pieces. Most people who have a bachelor's degree can afford their debt, and their debt is much less than the average statistics suggest.
Absolutely. And so with this debt, obviously, I think we all know that next month student repayments start back up. And so there are people who are starting to pay for it. But then I saw something somewhere not that long ago, that some recent graduates, because of the debt that they have right now, they're really looking back and regretting, I think, in a sense, actually, like either the degree that they chose, as Professor mentioned, or the school they chose. Just because, as Professor mentioned, it's sometimes the university itself that they choose that kind of puts them in that situation. So when we're talking about for future students who are heading into college, or maybe even those who are in their first, second year college, or third, however many years they are in their college career, what are some solutions or some ways that they could look into the economic effects of this and try to help them figure out a solution that will help them achieve whatever their career goals are, while also not forcing them to, as Tania said earlier, work until or pay it off till they're 60, or as I said earlier, for some other people who have mountains of debt when it comes to college. So what are some solutions or ways that we could probably think about this? This can be open to anyone.
I'm going to start again by saying we need to push back on this. Everybody's drowning under a mountain of debt. The data doesn't hold that up. The median debt is closer to the price of a new car. Is a 4-year education worth that much debt to you, right? We also need to look at other trends. Increasingly, college students don't want to live in hovels and live poor lives. They're going to college and they want a lifestyle that costs money. They borrow to pay for that lifestyle. And then we need to fund public institutions, right? I mean, we need to pay And it's not that as expensive as people think, and we've done it before. And the payoff doesn't just come to the individual, the payoff comes to the entire society. We have educated people who bring their capacities to our democracy. We have educated people who bring their capacities to our economy. You know, that if we raise tuition, what we're effectively telling people is you're going to higher ed only for yourself, sink or swim on your own. You better choose wisely. We're not thinking about it as a public good, that we're all investing in each other, and that there's going to be a broad swath of people going off there, from engineers to literary critics, right, who are going to add to our society and make it richer in all ways, including financially, but not only. And we've lost that way of thinking about higher ed, and we need to come back to that. But we won't come back to it if we're always if we misframe the problem, and so we need to understand that most students are not drowning under mountains of debt. The average student debt numbers are very misleading because they include MBAs and JDs and MDs, and so they make it look bad. And so if the reason I say that is that means it's actually a more solvable problem than we think it is. And it's not as expensive a problem to solve if we have the public will. And that goes back to our very first question. If the public will requires both parties feeling that universities are places worth investing in, and that goes back to the politics of higher ed, we really need to earn the trust of both parties, and both parties really need to see the broader benefits that come from investing in higher ed. There needs to be some breaking of the moment we're in.
Tanya, I saw the gears in your head moving around a little bit when I asked the question.
A quick idea, I put it like in our Zoom chat, like free public education, right? Educate all the people we can, right? Invigorate the nation. But again, what Ronan says is right. How do we pay for this? And let's say in the perspective where Johann's probably right? The average student debt probably isn't that much, but it's still a lot. Especially for like, your average American worker, right? We don't have years of experience, right? Nadia gives her experience. She still has yet to find a concrete job. That means not a concrete income. So that's going to affect on how she pays her student debt. So despite it not being as high as the media tells us, because the media always tells the truth, it's still quite high, right? So when we look at the idea that higher education isn't getting cheaper, because it isn't, obviously funding new dorms, new innovation, I get it. Costs are going to go up even without that, right? But take home pay has stagnated over the last few decades. So despite you having that degree, your pay isn't probably going to be as high as you want it to be, as it was for your parents or those who are elder to you, right? So when we're reapproaching education in this age of reform, like we see in Johann's book, I want to look at how we can reinvigorate our higher education system, right? And sometimes that means probably encouraging more STEM education. Maybe that means encouraging people to make smarter choices when it comes to federal loan debt, right? There's so many ways we can go into this. I'm someone who's a big proponent for free public higher education, right? But then again, the question comes down to how to pay for it. And I don't have a clue, because I'm not going to say we should copy our European brothers and sisters, because their system is so much different than our system. So we can't just say we should do what they're doing, because it's not going to make sense. Our system of governments, our economics are so vastly different that I can't just say that, right? And yeah, and as a producer says, community college is easier for people to go into. It's an easier pathway. Go your 2 years there, then transfer. You're going to save a lot of money, which I encourage high schoolers now. When I tutor high schoolers, they're saying, oh, college is so expensive. I don't want to take a loan. So I say, go to community. Do your general ed there, then transfer. That's going to save you so much money in the long term, but you have to make sure the credits you're taking are transferable to the school you want to go to. So it's a whole different other process on making it easier to understand the credit transfer process, right? But I honestly want to know everyone's perspectives when it comes to this. How can we change the way we approach this? Because I don't have a clue.
I've spent a lot of my time in Cal Berkeley, University of Arizona, and Arizona State. And where am I getting with this? They are big party schools. And kind of what a professor was saying is that the student loan is not that expensive. It's just people want to live a lifestyle. And I think we can all kind of assume what kind of lifestyle students are living when they don't have class. And it's especially in the college towns, it's a lot more than people think. And I've had so many people I know be like, why don't you go out 24/7? It's like, I don't know. I got bills to pay. And when I choose to maybe go out, it's with moderation. And I think people really just like don't understand, like the more they go out, and college is very like an opportunity based thing, and you can use your experiences to make smart decisions with your education and finances if provided with said finances, or be very reckless. And I think a lot of just young people, when they're given the opportunity of freedom, and I was definitely there too, just get incredibly reckless and a lot in debt and put themselves in these positions. And yes, maybe this what is coming from me is a bit more anecdotal, but especially with all these very large colleges like that are have really big social networks, that's kind of just seems to be a really reoccurring problem that I don't think is talked about enough, that people just don't make the wisest financial decisions due to temptations of going out and all that kind of stuff.
I kind of agree with those points, but I also think um, part of what Tania was talking about, one way that we can kind of help, I guess, in a sense, is it for high school students. One of the important things is offering kind of that the education of like how to navigate financial decisions when you're just going into pursuing higher education or in your future thing. I know in high school I didn't learn much about finance or how to navigate that. I was lucky that I had my parents to help me navigate how to use the FAFSA and how to apply for financial aid and scholarships and all of that stuff. And that's a privilege I was lucky to have that many don't have. So, and I think each school that you go to nowadays, the mindset is different based on socioeconomic status on what the goal after high school is. I know I went to one high school that touted going immediately to the military after high school, and then I went to another where it was just college and only college. So I think offering more education at a younger age on how to navigate post high school career paths and financial decisions and whatnot, I think could be incredibly helpful, because I know we have counselors in schools to help do that, but there's only so many counselors in a school, and those counselors only have so many resources they can do at a short period of time. So I think giving more widespread access to that kind of education can be very helpful in preventing a lot of people from making decisions that cause them to be in a lot of debt and to cause a lot of problems for their future careers and whatnot. So I think education is incredibly important in general.
I just want to add one thing to this conversation, that I think the three of you have covered a lot of things that I would have said, and particularly I appreciate, Ronan, that this is a complex problem where individuals are in systems, and both the system exerts agency and pressure on individuals and students, but also students have agency within that system to make choices. And like, that's true, right? And that doesn't mean we should blame the individual, and it doesn't mean we should blame the system. We should look at the ways these things are connected in producing outcomes, and what we can change. But I think ultimately, when we need to invest in education, K-12 higher education, because it serves a lot of good purposes. We need educated citizens. We want thoughtful people in our society. We want people who are productive in the economy. We need to invest. At the same time, we can't expect higher education to do it all. And so the other piece is, and we're starting to see this, from both parties, having industrial policies that encourage good work for people of all kinds of educational backgrounds matters, right? The recent investments we've made under the Biden administration, but they were bipartisan investments, have actually disproportionately helped people without college degrees. And so we also have to take a step back and say, okay, we can't expect one person navigating the system to figure it all out and make all the right choices in an unpredictable world. But we can try to think about the broader economic context in which all Americans are living and trying to make a living, and try to think about that higher ed is part of a broader network, and that some of these solutions exist in economic policy, in labor policy, and they don't all exist in higher ed. It just can't do everything, and it can't solve every problem.
Absolutely. And to kind of wrap up this conversation, also really talk about this when it comes to the next generation of college students, where they are in the midst of applying for early admission or early enrollment, or if they're, touring campuses right now, maybe they're in freshman and their guidance counselor is already bringing up the idea of higher ed to them. What advice would you give to those who are high school seniors about going to higher education?
You can make college fun and not even like a bad way. Like if you're like, this is an opportunity for me to grow, then take it for what it is and make sure to work hard because it's a lot of time management.
I have like two perspectives. My most logical side is telling prospective college students, look at what the Wall Street Journal posted, where they release a new college ranking formula that ranks if you will graduate on time with the college of your choice and make decent money after you graduate. My second part of me, which is my creative side, my Aquarius side, I guess you can say, is when you're looking at degree programs, find a degree program that works for you, that you can dedicate yourself to and constantly want to feel passionate into. You don't want to choose a degree that your parents want you to do. Then when you're doing it, you're not passionate. So then you're hitting a roadblock saying, what was the point of college? Because I'm not happy. Well, you didn't choose something you wanted to do in the first place. And sometimes that means it isn't college. It's actually a vocational school. It's a technical school. So choose something that's going to bring you true happiness. I know that may seem like a lot for people, but happiness and fuels your passionate self, right? Do that, do it for you, because at the end of the day, it's your life. Make sure you're getting the best of it.
Say also to pursue new opportunities when you pursue higher education. Don't just center yourself in, I'm going to do the same interests or the same things that I did in high school. Try to look at new things and meet new people and join organizations you may not initially have an interest in, but might turn out to be something very transformative for you. Really, you have a lot of opportunities when you pursue higher education. Make the best of it and challenge yourself to do something that's uncomfortable, because you might end up doing something and learning that you love something actually. So really, echoing everyone else's points, do what you love, but also see if there's things that you have never thought of considered before, because you might turn out to love those too.
Just going to echo that. I think ending with doing what you love is not a bad idea. I mean, be smart, right? Make smart choices. But if you are going to a good school with a good reputation, and I don't mean elite schools, by the way. I just mean, you didn't find your school online. So most colleges are good schools. Don't feel the pressure that every decision you make, including your major, will determine everything for the rest of your life. That should free you up. Almost every major leads to a good income that will provide a stable, not just a good life over time. If you major in something like English, you're going to bumble around a little more till you find it, but you're going to find it. I mean, the data shows you will find it and you will make a good living. So feel free to pursue what you love. And don't feel that doing so makes, life is so complex. Most jobs don't end in Most people are not ministers, lawyers, doctors. They find jobs they didn't expect, they didn't even know existed. They find things they didn't know they were good at. Let yourself know that luck plays a role in what happens in your life, that your aptitude, your character, your risk-taking or absence of risk-taking, all these things, all these things shape your future. And so I sometimes feel students feel like if I become a history major or I become a marketing major or I become a psychology major, that choice will determine everything about my future. It doesn't. And then you should see that as a way to free yourself to pursue that thing you love, knowing that it's not everything that's going to shape your future. And I think that let that burden go a little bit.
Absolutely. I think that's some good advice to those who are listening who either are in the midst of college, in the midst of applying, or even just those who know someone who else is applying. And then also, as our producer also says, I think it's also a nice, perfect way to also cap off this podcast. It's never too late to start college. So great piece of advice that way as well. Well, thank you all for participating in this discussion. I think it was a very lively discussion. I think we definitely touched upon a lot of the main issues and main points when it comes to the importance of college education. So thank you all for joining. And thank you all home for listening as well. This was Allow Us to Explain. Tune in next time. We'll be back soon. And until then, have a good one. This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.